The stew simmered low on my stove, rich with red wine and thyme, while December rain tapped the kitchen window like fingers asking to be let in. I'd set the table with my mother's old china cream with a thin gold ring, and ironed the linen napkins the way she always said looked grown up and respectable. The door opened to my own apartment, and my family entered with winter air and the smell of wet wool. My mother's eyes landed on the ring first, an emerald soft as dusk, and her smile thinned. My father clasped Jackson's hand a beat too firm. Derek scanned the room as if ranking the price of things. Amanda kissed my cheek and whispered, "It looks vintage," like that was a kindness and a wound. We ate under warm light. Jackson poured the champagne, Hand's steady voice soft. The first toast was meant to be ours, but my mother lifted her glass and said, "To family," as if to pin the moment to the wall, as if our news could wait until the real show began. When I announced the engagement, her mouth formed a small, "Oh, the kind people make at a museum when they don't understand the painting." My father cleared his throat and asked Jackson about salaries and private school and the lifestyle my daughter is used to. Derek suggested a prenup, laughing without humor. The bubbles in my flute went flat while I smiled and passed the bread basket like a waitress at my own table. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever felt invisible in a room you paid to light and heat, tap the like button, share this with someone who'll understand, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. To understand how that dinner bent the branch to breaking, you need to know how the tree was trained. I grew up in a house where the hallways felt like a trophy case that didn't include me. My father, Thomas, kept Derek's game balls in glass cubes along the mantel. My mother, Marie, taped Amanda's glossy photos to the fridge, her handwriting looping hearts around captions like, "Our star." My things, honor roll certificates, a program from a piano recital, were tucked into a kitchen drawer with the takeout menus. We were a family of oak tables and strict calendars, and shoes neatly lined by the mat. We were also a family that looked past the quiet girl who carried extra chairs into the dining room each Thanksgiving and remembered where the batteries lived. At 12, I sat under stage lights in a dress my mother had pressed the night before and scanned for familiar faces while the first notes of Chopin waited in my hands. The auditorium was full of strangers' parents with camcorders glowing red. I played anyway and bowed to applause that didn't know my name. When I stepped through our front door, the house was roaring at a replay of Derek's touchdown, the TV casting blue across their faces. "How was your little concert, sweetie?" my mother asked without looking up. I said, "It was fine," and carried my flowers to my room before their leaves could tremble. At 18, Amanda's graduation party spilled across our backyard tinted tables. A white cake with sugared peonies, a photographer clicking through cousins and aunts. A year later, mine was Olive Garden, a basket of breadsticks, and my father explaining gently, "We just can't do big 2 years in a row." That same month, a set of new golf clubs leaned against the garage wall, all chrome and promise. I washed the dishes after dinner and told myself every family keeps score differently. I told myself it didn't matter. In my 20s, I built a life that did not require anyone's applause. I learned to move money through systems the way water moves through pipes, predictable if you understand the pressure and the valves. While Derek chased a storefront he couldn't afford, and Amanda explored passions that faded like spring chalk on a sidewalk, I learned the quiet miracle of an automatic payment posting at 2:03 a.m. and a roof getting patched before the rain found its way into drywall. When my father's layoff pushed them toward a missed mortgage, I wrote a check and told my mother not to worry. "We'll pay you back the minute we can," she promised, tucking the envelope into her purse as if it were a receipt for groceries. The minute never came. It became a family legend that I had a good head for money, which turned into passwords and access and the quiet expectation that the heater would hum and the lights would glow because I had set them to glow. Every December, my mother curated Christmas like a gallery show. The banister wound and garlanded the 12-foot tree dressed in glass ornaments wrapped in tissue since the 80s, the stockings aligned like soldiers along the brick. I covered costs no one saw. The new artificial tree when the old one photographed shabby. The caterer last year when she wanted elegant but homey, which turns out to cost $8,000. Gifts mailed to relatives whose faces I could not pick out of a crowd, but whose names I knew from spreadsheet columns. I told myself it was love. I told myself it was easier. I told myself they would notice if not the money, then the effort. If not the effort, then the heart. I kept telling myself stories while my name slid to the edge of family photos like a caption no one bothered to read. The night of our engagement dinner, my mother admired my table while subtracting points I couldn't see. "The napkins are lovely," she said, though a crisp fold is more formal than the loose drape. My father asked Jackson if he planned to climb to administration someday because teaching is noble, but you know. And Jackson answered with patience that wasn't performative. When Derek announced halfway through dessert that his marriage was cracking and the bank had called about the house, every knife and fork on the table went still. The room shifted its weight. I brought more coffee to the living room and listened while my brother spread his troubles across the rug like papers from a box he'd been too scared to open. The more he spoke, the more my mother's gaze flicked to me, the family checkbook with legs, the lever attached to the problem if I'd just pull it the way I always had. 2 Sundays later, I came by my parents' house with gardening magazines I thought my mother would like, and walked into voices raised like storm shutters. The air changed when they saw me, guilt in the corners, smiles adjusted with trembling hands. We were discussing family matters, my father said, and my mother nodded, as if the words could shrink the room. Derek's look scar started like a plea and landed like a command. He named my wedding fund out loud like it was a community resource, a pot everyone knew about, a future made of numbers instead of vows. "Just until I get back on my feet," my mother said smoothly, the way she used to say, "Just one sip" when we were kids, and she wanted us to try the Brussels sprouts. $35,000. The number sat between us like a fourth-place setting knife and fork glinting. I took a breath and said I could help with 10. My father's face flushed a deep, disappointed red. "Your brother could lose his home and you're planning a party." Amanda shook her head in a slow, pitying rhythm like we were at a funeral and I'd spoken out of turn. Derek stood, grabbed his jacket, and said the words he knew would bruise. "Miss Corporate Success can't be bothered." The front door slammed. Somewhere, a neighbor's porch light blinked on at the noise. For days after silence did the work of a jury. Text threads that once included me shifted around my absence. A cousin I grew up with liked to comment about drama-free holidays. My grandparents wrote a careful email with phrases like family duty and understanding the bigger picture. I sent one long message, dates amounts the ledger I'd kept in my head for 13 years, and watched the little delivered checkmark sit there like a stone in water. Jackson held me while I argued with myself about whether love means endless yeses. He didn't tell me what to do. He just kept saying, "You are not wrong for needing a limit." Rain gave way to frost. Christmas lights went up all over the neighborhood, icicles along eaves wreaths on doors, reindeer that glowed steady on small lawns. My mother's house had always been brightest. She'd send me photos at midnight, the living room washed in gold captioned with something like magic. I stared at those photos and felt the old ache. No matter how old you are, no matter what you can afford, there's a part of you that still wants to belong at a table where your name is spoken with love. Then came the Monday afternoon at my desk, the office, hushed computers humming, when a small red circle appeared on my phone. One voicemail. I didn't listen right away. I finished an email, tightened a sentence, closed a tab. The sky outside turned that late-day winter gray that feels like a low ceiling. I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the quiet calm and clipped the way she sounded when she called the caterer to adjust headcount. "Scarlet," she said. "We've all agreed." I paused the message with my thumb hovering. The word agreed hung in the air, like breath in cold. A vote, I thought. Something official. Something decided about me without me. In the window's reflection, I could see my own face, surprised and very still, like a person learning she has been rehearsing the wrong part in a play. Before that sentence resumed, a different memory shouldered forward the folder on my laptop labeled Keep. Screenshots and emails and small cuts I'd told myself not to mind. Darling, while your promotion is nice, we're so excited about Amanda's new pottery hobby. Derek may have had another business setback, but at least he takes risks. Wish you could contribute more than just money to the family. Each line polite as napkin rings. Each line a weight. I unpaused, but I only caught the start of the next word before my finger pressed stop again. My pulse thudded in my throat. There is a moment sometimes when the ground you've learned to balance on finally names itself for what it is. Not a floor, a seesaw. I set the phone down on my desk, face up like evidence, and watched the red circle wait for me to finish hearing what I already knew. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, and the office heater clicked on for a cycle. Someone laughed down the hall. I felt the old instinct rise, call back fast, smooth it over, make it easy, and then felt it falter. Quiet gathered in the space where reflex would have been. I didn't know yet what I was going to do. I only knew the seat I'd been saving at their table all these years might never have been mine. And as the phone lit again, the message still waiting, I reached for it, slowly, deliberately, ready to hear the rest of the sentence that would make the room colder before it got warm. The office lights dimmed as the winter sky outside shifted from gray to black. I sat at my desk, staring at the phone that still glowed with a single unheard voicemail. The air felt heavy, like the quiet before a storm. I pressed play and listened. My mother's voice, steady, practiced, almost polite, filled the room. "Scarlet, we've all agreed you're not welcome at Christmas this year." She paused, as if adjusting her tone for effect. "You've made it clear you don't consider us family anymore. You can keep your money and spend the time with Jackson since that's obviously what you want. Don't contact us until you understand what family really means." I replayed it twice, not because I hadn't heard her, but because I couldn't believe how cleanly she'd cut the words. It sounded like a verdict, not a conversation. I tried calling back once, then again. Straight to voicemail. My father didn't answer either. Neither did Derek or Amanda. Every number led to silence. Every attempt felt like knocking on a door that had already been locked from the inside. When I got home, Jackson was already there sorting through mail at the counter. He turned when he saw my face, his expression shifting instantly. "What happened?" he asked, crossing the room. I handed him my phone without saying a word. As he listened, his jaw tightened. When the message ended, he just stood there for a moment before setting the phone down gently. "That's beyond cruel," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry, Scarlet." I sank into the couch, still in my work clothes, the fabric stiff from the day. 13 years, I whispered. "I've been paying their bills for 13 years. I've never missed a Christmas, never missed a single thing they needed. And now I'm voted out." Jackson sat beside me, pulling me close. "This isn't about the money," he said softly. "It's about control. You finally stopped doing what they expected, and they can't stand that." His voice was steady, grounding. The rest of the evening moved like slow water. We made tea, sat in silence, let the TV flicker without sound. I told myself it didn't matter that Christmas was just a date on a calendar. But inside, the hurt ran deep, the kind that sits heavy behind the ribs, hard to name, harder to let go. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The city was quiet under a thin layer of frost. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat by the window scrolling through my sister's social media without really meaning to. Her newest post stopped me cold, a photo of their decorated tree captioned, "Feeling blessed for a drama-free Christmas with the real family." Below it, my cousin Beth had commented, "Can't wait. Some people just don't deserve to be included." 26 likes. My parents among them. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. There was something final in their tone, like a door closing. Yet beneath the hurt, a strange calm began to settle, the kind that comes when you stop hoping for change. I turned off my phone and walked to the kitchen. The kettle clicked on. Steam rose quiet and clean. That was when the thought came to me, not out of anger, but out of clarity. They had made it clear that I wasn't part of their family anymore, but they were still living on my accounts I'd set up, managed, and paid from. The mortgage, the utilities, even the catering for that Christmas dinner they were now hosting without me. It wasn't a vengeful idea. It was something simpler, a decision to stop playing a role that had already been written out of the story. I opened my laptop, the familiar blue glow lighting the counter. Passwords I'd memorized years ago slid easily into place. Nothing had changed. Every account was still linked through my profile. I clicked through the payments: mortgage, electricity, gas, the catering deposit, and watched the numbers scroll. A $9,000 payment to a luxury catering service processed the same day they told me they couldn't afford to help my brother without my wedding fund. I called Jackson and told him what I'd found. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a pause. "What are you thinking?" he asked. I took a long breath. "I think it's time I stopped buying my way into their approval." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "If that's what you need to do, I'll stand with you. Just be ready for what comes next." I spent the next few hours at my kitchen table, treating the situation like a project at work, precise, procedural, detached. I called the mortgage company first, speaking to a representative who sounded half asleep. "There's been suspicious activity on this account," I said calmly. "Can we place a temporary hold until it's reviewed?" Within minutes, it was done. The next payment, scheduled for December 24th, would not go through. Then I called the utility companies. Each account had been set up years ago on my credit card when my father lost his job. They'd never changed it back. I reported the card as lost. By policy, all automatic payments would be suspended until the new one arrived after the holidays. Finally, the catering company. My voice softened into my mother's tone, years of mimicry making it easy. "This is Marie Winston," I said. "We need to cancel the order for Christmas Eve." The woman on the line hesitated. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Winston, but that's within the non-refundable window." I smiled faintly. "I understand. Family emergency. Please process the partial refund." Half the deposit would return to their card. The rest would be gone. When it was done, I sat back and stared at the screen. My hands weren't shaking. There was no rush of victory, no sense of cruelty, just quiet. I opened a new email and wrote, "Since I am no longer considered part of the family, I've removed my financial involvement from all accounts. Please make alternative arrangements for your bills and upcoming events. Scarlet." I sent it to my parents, copied Derek and Amanda, and closed the laptop. That evening, Jackson came by with takeout and a bottle of wine. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it for a long moment. "Lighter," I said. Like I finally stopped holding up a wall that wasn't mine to hold. He nodded. "You've done what you needed to do." We ate quietly, the city lights blinking outside like scattered fires. He stayed until midnight, and when he left the apartment felt still, not lonely, but steady. The days that followed moved slowly. I ignored my phone, ignored the holiday music in every store, ignored the ache that rose whenever I passed someone carrying a tree on their shoulder. On Christmas Eve, the snow began before dawn, light and silent. Jackson came over early with groceries and a grin that felt like sunlight. We cooked together, laughing at the mess of flour and spice filling the apartment with warmth. At 6, our friends arrived: Kate, with her apple pie, Miguel with his holiday cocktails, Lisa carrying flowers. The air smelled of cinnamon and roasting turkey. We ate, we talked, and for once, I didn't have to measure my words or my worth. The world outside the windows was white and calm. Later that night, as the snow thickened, I found myself picturing my parents' house. I could see it clearly, the garland winding up the staircase, the lights flickering on the 12-foot tree, the kitchen full of chatter. I imagined the exact moment the oven stopped humming, the music cut out, and the house went dark. My mother's voice sharp, my father confused. Derek's frustration rising, Amanda scrolling for takeout in disbelief. Relatives shivering in their coats as the perfect evening unraveled. The image wasn't satisfying. It was sobering. This was what a boundary looked like when it finally held. I didn't touch my phone that night. It stayed face down on the table while laughter filled the room. We toasted with sparkling cider and watched the snow drift against the windows. It was in every way the simplest Christmas I'd ever had. And the most peaceful. Christmas morning came soft and gray. Jackson made coffee while I opened a small box he'd wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a silver locket, plain and beautiful, engraved with one word enough. I smiled, tears threatening. "That's what you are," he said quietly. "Enough exactly as you are." When I finally checked my phone, there were 18 missed calls, 36 messages, and 4 voicemails. The first was from my father, voice tight with anger. "What the hell did you do with our accounts? Call me back immediately." The next from my mother, sharp and tearful. "You've ruined Christmas, Scarlet. How could you do this to your family?" Derek's message was short. "You're unbelievable." "Call Mom." Amanda's voice came last, shaky and dramatic. "The whole family's panicking because of you. Are you happy now?" I put the phone down and stared at the falling snow outside. "They remember my number when they need something," I said softly. Jackson looked over from the stove. "Funny how fast that works, isn't it?" I smiled faintly. "They can wait. Today's ours." And so they did. We spent the day on the couch, wrapped in blankets, watching old holiday movies. No fights, no pressure, no performance. Just quiet. Just peace. The day after Christmas, I woke to another message, this one different. My mother's tone was subdued, almost hesitant. "Scarlet, we need to talk. Please call when you're ready. No accusation, no demand. Just an opening." I sat with the phone in my hand for a long while before dialing. My father answered on the first ring, voice brisk. "Scarlet, what were you thinking? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I exhaled slowly. "I do. I stopped paying for people who told me I wasn't family anymore." He started to argue, but I cut in. "Dad, you said you'd all agreed. That means you made a choice. And I made mine." I heard movement, a muffled voice. Then my mother came on. "We were just hurt, Scarlet. We didn't mean for things to go so far." I closed my eyes. "You excluded me from Christmas because I wouldn't give up my wedding savings. You humiliated me for saying no. What did you think would happen?" There was a pause. "We never thought you'd go this far," she said softly. The house went dark. People left early. It was a disaster. I let the silence stretch before answering. Maybe that's what it took to understand how it feels to be left in the dark. On the other end, no one spoke. The quiet felt different now, not defensive, but uncertain. Jackson walked past, gave my hand a squeeze, and nodded for me to keep going. "I'm not doing this out of hate," I said calmly. "But I can't keep setting myself on fire to keep everyone else warm." My mother sighed. "I suppose we deserved that," My father's voice came in lower now. We didn't realize how much we leaned on you, Scarlet. We'll figure things out. For the first time in years, I believed he meant it. We talked for a few more minutes carefully, like people learning to speak a new language. The call ended with a fragile truce, no promises, no apologies yet, but a hint of awareness. I sat back, feeling something close to relief. Outside, the snow was still falling slow and steady. It looked like a clean start. I didn't know where things would go from there. But as the morning light touched the edge of the window, I felt something shift. Not triumph, not regret, just a quiet certainty that the rules had changed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their permission to feel whole. The next morning began with a light fog that softened the world outside my apartment. I made coffee and watched the steam curl into the air, trying to shake off the conversation from the night before. For the first time, my family had sounded almost human in their regret. There had been cracks in their certainty, a strain in their voices that suggested something new, awareness maybe. But forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a gate that opens an inch at a time. I sat at the kitchen table with my mug, warming my hands, reading over my notes from work, but my mind wasn't on numbers or clients. It kept circling back to that call. The exhaustion in my mother's tone, the way my father's anger had frayed into confusion. I didn't feel triumphant anymore. Just tired. Jackson walked in, still half asleep. His hair a mess, his voice gentle. "You look like you've been up for hours." "I have," I said. They called again. This time, they want to talk in person. He leaned against the counter, studying me. "Do you want to?" I stared down at the rim of my mug. Part of me does. Part of me doesn't trust them not to twist it into something else. He nodded slowly. "Then, don't go for them. Go for you. Get closure if that's what you need." The thought stayed with me all morning. By noon, I'd made my decision. I texted my mother agreeing to meet at their house that weekend. The reply came quickly, too quickly. "We'll have dinner ready at 6. When I pulled into their driveway Saturday evening, the house looked the same as it always had. White siding, porch lights glowing warm against the cold. Yet everything felt slightly smaller, as if the air itself carried the memory of our last argument. I paused on the walkway before knocking. My father opened the door first, the smell of roasted chicken and herbs spilling out behind him. His face looked older, softer around the edges. "Scarlet," he said simply, stepping aside. My mother stood in the hallway, hands clasped in front of her. For once, she didn't lead with a comment about my clothes or posture. She just said, "Thank you for coming." The dining room table was already set. I noticed the smaller details immediately, the plain white plates instead of the ornate china, the missing centerpiece, the absence of wine. It was a quiet setting, stripped of its usual performance. We sat down, and for several minutes, the only sound was the clink of silverware. Finally, my father set his fork down. "We've had a long week," he began, eyes fixed on his plate. "I realize that doesn't excuse what happened, but maybe it explains some of it." I waited, saying nothing. My mother exhaled her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "We took you for granted, Scarlet. We relied on you because you were capable, and it was easier to lean than to stand on our own." I looked between them. "You didn't just rely on me," I said quietly. "You built expectations out of my willingness. You treated my help like an obligation." I know my father admitted. "And when you finally drew a line, we made you the villain for it." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Their words were close to what I'd needed for years, but hearing them didn't erase the past. They filled the silence with apologies, with phrases like, "We never meant to hurt you, and we see it differently now." But apologies are only seeds. They need action to grow. When dinner ended, my mother reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly. "We've started making payments," she said. "Small ones, but it's a start. And we're taking a budgeting class at the community center." I nodded. "That's good." She gave a sad smile. "It's humbling." I stood to leave, and for the first time, neither of them tried to guilt me into staying longer. My father walked me to the door. "We'd like to meet Jackson again," he said, properly this time. I looked at him, trying to read the sincerity in his face. "Maybe after the new year." He nodded. "That's fair." The drive home was quiet. Streetlights stretched like amber lines across the pavement, each one marking the distance between the person I'd been and the one I was becoming. When I pulled into my garage, I sat there for a long time, engine off, hands on the wheel. Closure wasn't what I'd expected. It wasn't clean or cinematic. It was simply quieter. Inside, Jackson had left the living room light on and a blanket folded neatly on the couch. He looked up from a book when I came in. "How'd it go?" "They're trying," I said. "And for the first time, I think they might actually mean it." He smiled softly. "That's progress." I leaned against him, letting the weight of the evening settle. "It doesn't fix everything," I said. "But maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe this is enough for now." The weeks that followed carried a strange peace. My family didn't call often, but when they did, it was polite, measured, almost cautious. Amanda texted one afternoon to ask how wedding plans were going. The message was clumsy but sincere. I told her they were going well, that I'd send photos once we picked a venue. A day later, she replied with a heart emoji. It was small, but it felt like a bridge being rebuilt one plank at a time. Derek took longer. In late January, he called out of the blue. I hesitated before answering. His voice sounded rough, tired. "Hey, Scar. Just wanted to say I'm sorry for what I said that day. You didn't deserve it." I didn't know how to respond at first. "Thank you," I said finally. "That means a lot. I started seeing someone about the money stuff." He continued. "A counselor. I'm trying to get things straight." "I'm glad," I said. "Really?" He was quiet for a moment. "I know I made things hard. You were right to stop helping. I just wish I hadn't had to learn it that way." I could hear genuine regret in his voice. "Maybe we all had to learn the hard way," I said softly. Spring came early that year. The snow melted and light filtered through the windows in the mornings. Jackson and I settled into the rhythm of planning our wedding. Nothing extravagant, just simple, sincere. My parents offered to help, but I declined politely. "You've done enough," I told them. "This one's on us." In March, my mother asked if she could visit. She arrived with a tin of cookies and a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note, her handwriting careful and deliberate. "We're proud of you. Thank you for teaching us that strength doesn't have to shout." I read it twice, my eyes stinging. It wasn't about repayment anymore. It was about recognition. As the months passed, I noticed the small shifts. Amanda found steady work at a gallery downtown and invited me to lunch once a week. Derek started coaching youth baseball. My father began volunteering at a local food bank. The changes weren't grand, but they were real. One evening in late spring, I sat on the balcony watching the sun sink behind the city skyline. The sky faded from gold to rose to deep blue. Jackson brought me a cup of tea and joined me. "You've been quiet," he said. I was thinking about Christmas, I replied. He raised an eyebrow. That's a thought I didn't expect to hear in May. I smiled faintly. Not the holiday itself, just how something that painful ended up changing everything. He nodded. You set the boundary, and everyone had to learn where they stood. Maybe for the first time, I said I do too. We sat there until the last light disappeared, the air cooling around us. I thought about the woman I'd been always overextending, always waiting for approval that never came. And I thought about the woman sitting here now, finally at peace with the silence that used to scare her. A week later, my mother called again. We'd like to host dinner, she said, her tone hesitant. Not a big event, just family. There was a pause, then she added, We'd like you and Jackson to come. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I smiled into the phone. All right, Mom. We'll be there. After I hung up, I stood by the window, watching the city lights blink one by one in the distance. This time, it wasn't fear or guilt that filled me. It was something steadier, an understanding that forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply lets you walk beside it without tripping over the same stones. And as I turned off the lights and followed Jackson down the hallway, I felt the quiet promise of something new taking shape. A life built not on debt or approval, but on choice. Dinner at my parents' house was set for a mild Saturday in June, the kind of evening that hummed with soft light and the smell of cut grass. Jackson drove while I watched the road wind through the old neighborhood, past the corner store, where my father still bought his morning paper. I didn't know what to expect when we arrived. There had been gestures, apologies, small repayments, warmer words, but this would be the first time all of us were together again under one roof. The porch light clicked on as our car pulled into the drive. My mother opened the front door before we even reached it, her face lit by a nervous smile. She looked smaller than I remembered, but kinder too. I'm glad you came, she said, her voice gentle. Dinner's almost ready. Inside, the air smelled like rosemary and roasted chicken. My father was setting the table, concentrating on aligning the forks with the plates. Derek and Amanda were already there helping in the kitchen, their voices quiet but calm. For once, there was no tension hiding in the corners of the house, just an uneasy hope trying to find its footing. We gathered at the table as the evening light faded through the blinds. My mother reached for the serving dish, her hand steady. It feels good having everyone here again, she said softly. It's been too long. Derek nodded. Too long, he echoed, his voice rough with something unspoken. Amanda glanced at me, then at Jackson, and gave a small smile that felt like a truce. The meal began awkwardly filled with the careful politeness of people relearning how to talk. My father asked Jackson about his students, and this time there was no hint of condescension in his tone. Jackson answered easily, describing the debate team's latest win and how proud he was of the kids. My mother listened, her eyes bright, her laughter quiet but genuine. At some point, my father lifted his glass. I'd like to say something. He began, clearing his throat. I don't think I ever told you how proud I am of what you've built, Scarlet. You've done more with your life than I ever managed, and I see now that my criticism came from my own discomfort, not your shortcomings. The table went still. For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of the air conditioner and the clink of ice in Amanda's glass. My father had never been a man of open sentiment. Hearing those words from him felt like an old door quietly unlocking. Thank you, I said, my voice catching just slightly. That means more than you know. We finished dinner under a softer rhythm. Laughter came easier. Stories filled the gaps, and by dessert the air around us had changed. My mother served peach cobbler and watched as Jackson complimented her cooking. "It's nice to be appreciated for something other than my decor," she said with a small wry smile. Later, when the plates were cleared, my father suggested a walk. The sky outside had deepened to violet, and the first fireflies flickered near the hedges. We walked along the quiet street where I'd learned to ride a bike his pace slower than I remembered. "You were right to do what you did at Christmas," he said after a long silence. "We all needed that wake-up call." I was angry at first, but now I see it was the only way to make us listen. I looked at him, the man who had always seemed unshakable. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," I said. "I just couldn't keep pretending everything was fine." He nodded. "Sometimes it takes breaking something to fix it properly." His words lingered in the air, honest and heavy. When we turned back toward the house, the porch lights glowed ahead of us like a small invitation. Inside, Jackson and my mother were talking quietly in the living room, while Amanda and Derek washed the dishes side by side. The sight of them sharing that space without friction felt like a miracle too simple to announce. Amanda looked up as I entered. "You know," she said, drying her hands on a towel, "I used to think you had it easy because you were so successful. But I see now that you were carrying all of us." I smiled faintly. "You were just doing what we all learned to do. Believe the story Mom and Dad told us." She nodded slowly, eyes softening. "I'm trying to unlearn it." That night, as Jackson and I drove home, the windows rolled down to catch the warm summer air. I felt lighter than I had in years. The road stretched ahead silver under the moonlight, and for the first time, the word family didn't sting. Weeks passed, and the tentative peace between us grew steadier. My parents began attending therapy sessions together, something my mother mentioned with shy pride. Derek called now and then to share news about his new coaching job. Amanda sent photos of her art gallery displays, each message more confident than the last. One afternoon in late August, my mother called and asked if I could come by. When I arrived, she was sitting at the kitchen table with a folder of papers and a small velvet box. "Your father and I wanted you to have this," she said, sliding the box across to me. Inside was my grandmother's ring, a simple gold band with a narrow diamond. Nothing extravagant, but rich with history. "She left it to me," my mother continued. "But I think she'd want you to wear it. You've earned it." I traced the ring's edge with my thumb. "Mom, she shook her head. "You don't owe us anything anymore. This isn't about repayment. It's about recognition." The words caught in my throat. For so long, everything between us had been transactional money effort, silence traded for the illusion of peace. This felt different. This was acknowledgement without condition. When I left, the late summer sun spilled gold across the driveway. I sat in the car for a moment, the ring warm in my palm, and thought about how far we'd all come from that cold Christmas night. Boundaries had once felt like walls. Now they felt like foundations. In September, Jackson and I finalized the wedding plans, a small countryside ceremony, just family and a few close friends. My mother helped pick the flowers, and my father practiced his speech, determined to get it right. Even Derek joked about not messing up his tux, and Amanda offered to paint a portrait for us as a gift. The morning of the wedding arrived clear and bright, a soft breeze carrying the scent of lavender through the fields. Standing in front of the mirror in the small bridal suite, I barely recognized myself, not because of the dress, but because of the calm in my reflection. My mother knocked and stepped inside. 5 minutes, she said, her voice light. She adjusted the lace on my sleeve and smiled. "You look beautiful." "Thanks, Mom." She lingered, her hand brushing mine. "I know I said this before, but I'm proud of you. For everything. You taught us what strength looks like when it's quiet." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. You taught me plenty too, I said. Maybe we just had to learn it in reverse. When I walked down the aisle, my father at my side, his arm trembled slightly as he handed me to Jackson. He leaned close and whispered, I'm not going to mess this up. The ceremony was simple sunlight through old oak branches, vows spoken like promises we already lived. I could see my family in the front row faces open, unguarded. For once, there was no resentment hiding beneath the smiles. At the reception, laughter filled the small hall. My father stood to give his speech. For too many years, he began his voice unsteady. I failed to see the incredible daughter standing right in front of me. I thought success meant trophies and titles. But it's this integrity, compassion, the ability to forgive without forgetting. He turned toward me. Scarlet, you didn't just build a career. You built us back into a family. Applause followed, but all I could do was smile through the tears. Jackson squeezed my hand, his eyes warm and steady. Later, as the sun dipped low over the countryside, I stepped outside to catch my breath. The fields glowed gold cicadas humming in the distance. Amanda joined me barefoot, holding 2 glasses of champagne. She handed me one and laughed softly. It's strange, she said. I used to think peace meant everything staying the same. But maybe it's just learning how to live differently. I raised my glass. To different. We clinked the sound small but clear. Inside, music drifted through the open doors, slow, familiar, timeless. As twilight settled, I looked back at the glow of the reception hall, at the family I'd fought so long to reach. We were imperfect, still learning, still fragile in our forgiveness. But for the first time, it felt real. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the quiet joy and exhaustion of the day, I sensed that this wasn't an ending at all. It was the start of something steady and true, the life that begins after survival. The day after our wedding felt impossibly still, as if the world itself had paused to exhale. The countryside lay quiet under a veil of silver mist, and the air smelled faintly of rain and wildflowers. Jackson and I sat on the porch of the little inn where we'd stayed the night before, our coffee steaming between us. For the first time in years, I didn't feel pulled in opposite directions. There was no phone buzzing with family demands, no undercurrent of tension waiting to spoil the morning, just the hum of distant birds and the sound of wind moving through tall grass. He reached over, covering my hand with his. You did it, he said softly. You built something steady out of all that chaos. I smiled. We both did. Later that morning, as sunlight burned away the fog, I walked along the gravel path behind the inn. The earth was damp under my shoes, and the sound of bees floated from a patch of lavender near the fence. I thought about my family, how close we'd come to breaking completely, how strange it felt that the breaking had saved us. There was no bitterness left, just a quiet ache that had softened into acceptance. When we returned home a few days later, the apartment felt smaller, warmer. The wedding photos had already arrived from our photographer, a handful of early previews. One showed my father standing beside me just before I walked down the aisle, his expression proud but shy, as though he were seeing me clearly for the first time. Another captured my mother wiping her eyes while Jackson spoke his vows. They were small moments, but together they felt like proof that love can bend and still not break. A week passed before I visited my parents again. Their house looked different now, less staged, more lived in. The heavy velvet curtains had been replaced with lighter ones, and the scent of fresh bread drifted through the open windows. My mother was in the kitchen, apron dusted with flour, humming a tune I hadn't heard since childhood. She turned when I walked in, her smile hesitant, but genuine. "You're early," she said. I was just about to start the glaze. "It smells wonderful," I said, leaning against the counter. "You seem happy." She wiped her hands on a towel. "I am. It's strange learning how to slow down. Your father keeps reminding me that perfection was never the goal." I laughed softly. "He's right. You'll enjoy things more this way." When my father came in from the garden, his hands rough with soil, he greeted me with an easy warmth that used to be reserved for Derek. "Tomatoes finally came in," he said. "We've been growing too many. Thought you might take a few home?" It was such a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. For years, everything between us had been measured: money, effort, gratitude. Now it was just kindness, unspoken and uncalculated. Derek arrived halfway through dinner, bringing his 2 children with him. They ran through the yard chasing fireflies while he helped my father with the grill. He looked different, leaner, more grounded, the restless edge gone from his eyes. At one point, he caught my gaze and gave a small nod. It wasn't an apology or a request. It was understanding. Amanda came later, arms full of paintings wrapped in brown paper. "I wanted to show you something," she said, unrolling one of them on the table. It was a portrait of our family, each of us seated around a long table, laughter frozen mid-breath, light spilling through a window. But in the painting, no one was blurred at the edges. We all existed equally. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "I wanted us to look the way we could have looked," she said quietly. "Maybe the way we do now." The evening slipped into a soft rhythm of conversation and shared stories. My mother's laughter filled the kitchen, unguarded for once. My father poured lemonade for the children, his voice gentle and patient. And as the sky dimmed to a deep, comforting blue, I realized I was witnessing something I'd once believed impossible, a family that had finally learned to live without roles. When the night ended, my mother walked me to the car. She touched my arm before I got in. "You were right about everything," she said softly. "About boundaries, about respect. We needed to learn it from you." I smiled, feeling tears rise, though they didn't fall. "It was never about being right, Mom. I just wanted us to be honest." She nodded slowly. "Honesty takes courage." I see that now. The drive home was quiet, the road lit only by the moon. Jackson reached over to squeeze my hand, and for a moment I felt the same peace that had carried me through our vows. The kind that doesn't shout or demand, it just settles inside you, steady and certain. Months passed. Life found its rhythm again. Work balanced with weekends, dinners, with laughter, mornings with calm. My parents visited once a week, sometimes bringing pie, sometimes just themselves. Derek called to share his son's first home run, his voice full of pride, but no trace of envy. Amanda's art began selling steadily, and she started teaching part-time at the community college. There was no grand transformation, no cinematic forgiveness. Just small, steady change that grew roots. One quiet Sunday morning, I stood on our balcony watching the city wake. The air was cool, the sky pale gold. Jackson was still asleep inside, his breathing, even the sheets rustling softly when he turned. I held a cup of coffee between my palms and thought about the years it had taken to reach this peace. Healing hadn't arrived all at once. It had come in fragments, in conversations that ended without shouting, in dinners where no one kept score, in realizing that love doesn't always sound like "I'm sorry." Sometimes it sounds like, "Can I help with the dishes or drive safe?" Later that day, we drove out to the countryside to visit my parents. The field behind their house had turned amber with autumn grass. My father was mending a fence while my mother waved from the porch, her hair loose in the wind. When I stepped out of the car, I saw Derek tossing a ball with his kids, and Amanda painting on a small easel by the garden. Scarlet, my mother called her voice bright. Dinner's almost ready, Jackson laughed beside me. Feels different now, doesn't it? Completely, I said. But it's the same house. He looked at me for a long moment. No, he said. It's not the house that changed. That evening after the meal, the family drifted outside to watch the sun sink behind the hills. The light turned everything gold, then soft rose before fading into blue. No one spoke for a while. The air smelled of pine and smoke from the grill. I sat beside my mother on the porch steps, and she reached for my hand, holding it lightly, as if words weren't necessary anymore. When the first stars appeared, I finally stood and looked toward the road. It curved gently away from the house, quiet and endless. For so long that road had meant escape. Now it felt like connection. Peace, I realized, wasn't a finish line. It was the long stretch of calm after you've stopped chasing approval and started choosing yourself. It was knowing you could walk away if needed, but choosing to stay because you're no longer afraid. As the last of the daylight faded, I took one final look at the people I'd spent so many years trying to reach. They were laughing softly together, no longer perfect, but finally real. I stepped into the glow of the porch light, the evening air cool against my skin, and felt something shift deep inside me, an ease I'd spent a lifetime earning. Some wounds don't fade because we forgive. They fade because we finally let go. If this story touched something in you, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever had to fight for peace in your own family, I'd love to hear how you found it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about quiet strength, second chances, and the kind of healing that lasts. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do isn't to win, it's to finally rest.